Hello, I'm Daniel Gallagher. I'm a senior software engineer in the front end, full stack front end of the Subito search. And I'm going to talk today about some things that I learned when I worked in a public sector company that I think can be transferred over to the work that we do in a company like Adevinta. Um, so just an FYI for anyone, there's no GIFs, animations, nothing moves in this presentation at all. So anyone that needs to be aware of that, you should be fine with all this. I didn't start my timer. There we go. Okay, so I have a really short intro. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the product side of things, which I've called here is the how part of it. And then going from sort of an abstract situation to quite a reified situation with some very concrete examples for a more technical part, and then a quick wrap up at the end. So I'm going to start just with a quick definition of these three things. Anytime that you want to talk about users, it's important to define who users are, which can sound trivial, but it can be quite problematic if people think they're talking about the same thing and they're not. When I talk about users here, unless there's an exception, I mean just private citizens in the public. So the professional users who use our products aren't really in scope, except for the stuff that applies to them, but it's not really the focus. This conference being what it is, this is all web stuff, even though you could probably stretch some of these things to to backend into apps. It's not really the focus. And it's worth bearing in mind generally in planning, and doing the work that we do, that we're a public company too, but it's public as in listed on a stock exchange. And the goal that we have as a private business is to make money. This quote is from a book called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, which is pretty good. It's a bit. I have it as a comic. It's kind of a weird comic, but it's good. But it's worth bearing in mind that is the goal that we have in the work that we do here, especially when I'm going to talk about all these sort of nice things to do for people. We do still want them to give us cash. Alrighty. So the background that I have on this, which is kind of what inspired me to make the proposal for this talk, was the job that I had before I moved to Subito was in BBC Education in Glasgow in Scotland. I worked there for 2 years as a front-end developer on the product which is called Bite Size, which is an education product by the BBC for students, particularly for students, and also for teachers. Teachers make a really small part of the public for that, and then the majority use case is to study for exams. And it's a really popular platform. Every year we used to get hundreds of like testimonials from kids who would say, you changed my life. I got an B in biology. I was predicted for a D. All this sort of stuff. It was all like real human impact. It was really, really nice. The BBC is the public broadcaster for the UK, and the way that it's funded is by a TV license. Like I think a lot of European countries have this. Maybe Canada has. I don't know if Australia has as well. I don't know. Anyway, you pay a fee if you have a TV which can receive a TV signal, and that pays for that funds the BBC. You're not really allowed to not pay this. You can fully disconnect yourself from being able to receive TV, but it's quite an extreme step. So there isn't really a choice not to pay. But there's the consequence of that, and that's been the case basically forever, or for a long time at least, is that everything that the BBC puts out in the UK is prepaid. It's already paid for, so there's no cost at the point of use. Which means that the work that you do there is basically just to keep people happy so that they don't take such an extreme dislike that they go ahead and cancel that payment and disconnect themselves from getting any TV. Which is a really interesting way to work, because there isn't really there's no money concept. Money is sort of dealt with by the enforcement agents, which are a real thing. We just have to keep people happy, and you just work to make the best thing that you possibly can for all these people, which is really, really nice. Quite an interesting change from working in I worked for an American medical company before, which was like the opposite of this. But the thing here, this is the back of an ID badge. It's not mine, but it's exactly the same as what I had. These are the values of the company. There are 6, like we have our 4. Though there is one here about respect, which is a good point. It's not really the one that's the sort of topic at play here. The second one, audiences are at the heart of everything we do, was one of the most important drivers behind the work that we did. And this used to come up quite a lot. People would say this because you've got it, you know, on hand all the time. And in the time that I worked there, it changed the way that I was able to sort of perceive the public that I was making this work for, that were going to be the users of the things that we were making. It also gave me quite a big boost of confidence that if you do things in the right way, you can have like a value-driven organization. It doesn't need to be sort of a proposal. It really, really can happen. So yeah, that was the background. So I did work there, and I work here. And I think that there are things that I'd learned there that we can do here and that we could do in different parts of Adevinta. So that took longer than I thought. I'm just going to get into it here. First thing, in the flow, generally, is that we decide to do something and then we do it. So this little piece here is going to be about the product sort of refinement decision-making stages, where there's more, at least from a developer's perspective, there's more interaction with product managers and UX people, maybe with other teams at this stage as well, rather than the real sort of technical decisions you make as you actually write this product. I'm going to just go straight to this, the first of the 2 points. If you want to be respectful of your audience or not, if you want to make something for them in general, you do need to know things about them. One of the things you need to know about them, for example, is that they exist to begin with, which sounds a little bit stupid. It's sort of provocative, but just because you can imagine a user for something doesn't mean that that person really exists out in the world. And it's sort of the difference between, do we have a user base for this, or do we think that we have a user base for this? And if you want to try and improve something for people, those people should ideally exist in the first place, and then want the thing that you're trying to make. Offering solutions to problems that don't exist also isn't a good thing. And this is a little bit fluffy because this is the abstract part, but I think the thing that comes down to being, you know, respectful of people here is, when people use our marketplaces, they're there to exchange money for goods and services very often, but sometimes they're really big goods like cars or houses. But even if they're not, whatever they want to buy, we should be helping them to get what they want in the least amount of time with the highest quality, having a nice experience. So if we're solving problems that don't actually exist, that's not a good use of our time in offering them something. And one of the ways that we can get to know these people, because we can't interview everyone, there are 60 million people in Italy. We can't interview all those people. We can interview some of them, and we do have user researchers, for example, in Subito, I imagine in other places. And we can get data from them. We can get data from tracking. One of the things we need to do to get data from tracking is track. Then we need to have relationships and workflows that integrate data engineers or data analysts or data scientists. And I think pulling all of these things together is important, because you need to have I think also engineering people need to have this. You need to have that vision of, if we don't already know this, then we're probably not going to do the right thing. We don't know that we're going to do the right thing, and we can only do so many things, so we should hopefully do the right ones. Otherwise, it's going to be a waste of time for everyone, and the people that we're building this stuff for aren't going to be happy. So, yeah, bear in mind that we might not know who that public is when we're making these things, but there are many, many steps that we can take that can help us to get there. And speaking of building, the other thing that I think is a little bit more concrete in terms of being considerate of people is that people want to use the stuff that we're making, and we can make different choices. Beginning at the product phase, this doesn't need to be dev, and actually if it's not already agreed, it can't be dev, because it's not our responsibility to decide product scale and increments and things like that. Product managers have that role. But taking an orientation towards releasing smaller functional things in shorter timeframes is delivering value to people, and really trying to stay laser focused on giving value for people is something that I think takes you quite a long way towards really solving problems for them, considering them as the most important people. Because this is what I had to do before. There was no other concept. There was no, and then also hopefully we make money, or then they see more adverts on the page, and that didn't exist. It was just about, and then they'll be happy. We can do that as a means to an end, but if you want to focus on that as a target as well, let people use the stuff that we're spending time on, and breaking down a fully idealized product into the pieces of it that actually need to work on their own to be able to be released is quite tricky. I know that at the level of Adevinta, this has been pushed quite hard. This is what data-driven kind of leads to, because you need to get data faster, so you need to release faster. A lot of these things come together, but it doesn't mean that you need to do something that takes 3 months in 2 months. It means that you can release the thing that's done after 2 weeks, rather than wait another 10 weeks to actually get it out. An example of what I have from this, from the job I had before, was a migration we did of a rewrite we did of the main product, which was a thing called a study guide. It was a multi-page or one or more pages of content for these kids to study on. And it was really old, but new palette, everything was going to be really sort of electric orange, different layout, new font. BBC paid for a font to get made and all this stuff. We need to migrate it, and the first thing that we released in this whole big, like 6-month project, was a domain that hosted the header, a massive white block with nothing in it, and then the footer. And we released that because we needed something to tell the editorial team that, we're actually working on this, something's going to happen, because this was promised for a long time, and then it finally materialized. And for the first phase of this release, we just put out this shell of a page, and that made them happy for a little while. They saw that something was going to happen. And then working with a CMS and like a front end, but I could do a whole other talk about the platform that we worked on with these little nano services. But we were able to integrate text, fill in a text field, and that text appeared on the page. And that took about a week and a half or something. We had to do the overhead for the CMS and a bunch of stuff, about 2 weeks to get this stuff done. And you can get text on a page. And it sounds like it's not really very fancy, but that was 2% of the content, which included multiple subjects, because there are some subjects that didn't have any fancier stuff in there. So people were able to switch after about a month to just go straight on the new platform. Next iteration was to add support for images. So we had to do like another CDN thing, CMS, front end. And then with text and images, 26% of the content that we had could have been migrated, and a whole host of people were able to switch over and use this new thing without having to wait on the old one anymore. And we did that over and over again. The alternative would have been waiting 6 months for everyone, and no one gets anything at all. And no one getting anything at all is not I don't think it's a really respectful way of treating their time, because we could have done that, and you do choose not to. And I think to try and push for releasing things when they're good enough, which is very hard to define, I understand that, but good enough as sort of the point that you're aiming for before you put something out into the world, I think is a really, really decent thing to aim for, because people shouldn't have to wait. Most of the time, what we do is actually decent, and then it can just be used, and then we can make it better. But people want to be able to do things like filter by some new field that we've added, or do a search that includes this new thing, or see this information, even if it doesn't look the way that we want it to look in the end, because we're giving them value from the very beginning. As long as it's there, like the most raw, horrible looking text, it's still information that wasn't there before. So there's tons and tons of cases where something is actually good enough to give value to someone. And definitely something I support from an engineering side is identifying those breakpoints so that you can try to get And product people very often are very supportive of this, but it needs to start somewhere. I want to release this because someone will be able to use that. And if it can help someone, you should let it help someone. I think is kind of the point I'm trying to make. But moving on to the second half, 15 minutes in. There's also stuff that we can do as developers, engineers, whatever we're going to have as the title, which is in technical decisions. These can be applied sort of regardless of the product stuff, depending on what they are. Sometimes the way that you do something can be changed. Sometimes it can't, so that's why I separated these out. So I would definitely recommend starting from product and flowing it down. But there are other times where no matter what you've said at product, we need to make technical decisions one way or the other. So this one, again, fun and provocation. In a lot of technical situations, it's difficult to say that there is a right answer. Very often there are multiple right answers, and sometimes there are wrong answers. In this context, I think that choosing between the right answers is usually the more difficult thing. And something that happens quite often is that, I say it's very generalized, but something that happens is people choose what's easier to do rather than what's actually better for the other person, the user in this case. And I think about this every time that I see a media query done in JavaScript, which is something I think is just an absolutely outrageous waste of everyone's time and the electricity that user has paid for to charge the phone with. There are very, very few cases where you cannot do that in a better way. There are some where it's the only thing you can do. There are plenty of cases where you have to re-render the actual HTML, but you add a class because you've changed a media query that you've done with window.matchMedia. You could have done that a better way. Is my suggestion. I think that it's worth bearing in mind what the different languages of the front end are there for. The HTML is there for semantics and structure, the CSS is there for styles, and then the JS is there for just about everything else. But quite often there is an overlap in what they can do, especially with JS versus the other two. HTML and CSS don't really have so much overlap anymore because a lot of stuff was taken out in HTML5. But if you are going to be making these decisions, and you will be because we do them all the time, every single day, I really, really recommend or suggest quite strongly, bearing in mind that people just want to get this stuff done, and using an incredibly fragile language like JS for something that can be done in another language that's much, much more resilient, HTML or CSS, which are hyper resilient languages by their design. Using JS for that is probably not the best choice of the alternatives that are there. It really should be something that you treat, I think, in many cases as a last resort. And then in tons of cases, it's the only resort because you can't do, there's so much that HTML can't do. There's also so much that it can do. Other things like forms, HTML forms, for example, could be quite a decent technical choice because if your JS fails, this person should still be able to log in. There's no real reason that they shouldn't be able to do that. Not building in resiliency is not building in any respect for this user. When we make a mistake and something goes wrong on this page, we get errors because we don't have a try catch because we didn't expect it. So now people can't log in. You shouldn't force people into that situation when there's an escape hatch. And I think one other place where you need to make choices, and this one can be even harder than the languages. Sometimes, a code review will see someone say, "Oh, you should move that into the, move that into CSS. This should be using the HTML or whatever." Error handling can be really, really tricky and really, really case by case. But sometimes just failing out completely is better than trying to make up for something that's gone wrong, because fundamentally something's gone wrong when you're in an error scenario. And a case that we have on Subito right now, which has been inherited from the legacy platform, but it's something I think about because I interface with it. And it annoys me a little bit every single time. If you add a new parameter to the search and then you do a search with that and save that search, so you can rerun it later or get emails to notify you about new stuff. If the legacy part of the stack hasn't been updated to know about that filter, it just ignores it. The front end tells you that you saved your search, and then you go and try and run that search and it's wrong. And this is no good for us. We have to go and do a whole bunch of dependency updates every time, which is fine. But the thing I really, really dislike about that pattern is that we tell the person that it's gone fine and it hasn't gone fine. And it would have been better if we just errored out and refused to let them save it, because that way they wouldn't be able to be mistaken into doing the wrong thing. But there are other cases where you don't need to fail. Like if you're ordering fields of an ad and you get a field that you don't expect, you don't need to throw or anything. You can just like put it randomly in the order or put it at the end or do something like that, because it's not going to do any harm. But I think trying to sort of manage the harm reduction, maximize the values is useful. But sometimes if there's no good choice, the best choice is to just stop, because the alternative is, tricking people or giving them unexpected results, which I don't think is the right way to go. I have an eye on time. I'm going to go really fast on this one and then talk about the next part, which is more interesting for me. We just had a talk about this. So, Lighthouse, Web Vitals, all of that's absolutely critical. It's really, really important to have a picture of what the user base actually is like in terms of technology. If you're not using Lighthouse, you can get a look at that. You can use web page test to get a sort of snapshot. Google Search Console, if it's set up, will probably grab Web Vitals data from your Chrome users, which are probably quite a large chunk of your system, and will also cover the lower end mobile devices, which will be Android sort of by definition. And about trying to make decisions for people. This ties into the product part as well, but if we're making technical decisions about performance, it's really, really important to know what the performance target is, because if every single one of your users is on an iPhone 13 somehow, you probably don't need to worry about a bunch of stuff. You really need to worry about Safari compatibility, for example, but you need to know who you're aiming for before you can make any sort of real decision. But Juan covered that really well already, so I'm going to skip on to this next part. Which is about the hardware. I hate talking about hardware. I'm a web developer because I don't ever want to talk about or think about hardware in my life. But there are some times that we can play with it, and it's nicely abstracted, and there are things that we can do. And I think the hardware does come into being something that's really about respecting the choice that the user's made in whatever way. We can take a bit of a sacrifice or not. We can offer them something more. Sometimes we just need to do a little bit of work, and we can give them a better experience that's more adapted to them, because we shouldn't really be gatekeeping people based on what they've been able to buy. And there's a lot that we can do in the web to make up for that. And I think that effectively we have sort of a moral duty to try and get that to as many people as possible. Certainly, one of the mottos of Subito is to be the digital equivalent of the market square that all Italians use. So if we build a website that can't be used by all Italians, we're already failing on that. And we don't. We really do aim for this. We have a lot of web vitals. We have a lot of tracking and stuff to make sure that our product does work for more and more people. There's more that we can do, but I think that there are points here that we can look at. So the first one is a positive one about the hardware and about respecting the fact that someone might have spent 1,300 euros on that iPhone that just got released, which has got like a 8K screen, whatever. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think your eyes can actually tell the difference here anymore. But if someone has a high resolution screen, and many people have high resolution screens, especially on mobile, you should probably be showing them high resolution images, because they'll expect to see them. They haven't spent all that money to look at like the 1x version of an image when they could get the 2x, maybe even 3, although I think the 3x doesn't really work and it's probably too heavy. But this is a really, really quick one to do. We've got support for source set and images, or if you're going to do multiple formats, like you're going to do JPEG, WebP and AVIF, for example, you can do it with picture on HTML. You don't really need to do anything particularly fancy anymore. HTML's covered this since like 2014. you can say, oh, we have this one, which is the 1x, and we have the 2x. These are the dimensions. Or you can just say it's always going to be shown at the same size, point to a URL that covers the 2x one, and the browser will just go and get it, and they'll automatically get the best resolution. If they have an older desktop which has only got a 1x screen, they get a 1x with no work from you. We just send the same HTML, they get the better result. This is quite a small thing that can make quite a big difference, because you can really see the difference between a 1 and 2x picture. And when you're looking at stuff like houses and cars and 6-figure prices and stuff like that, it's worth not having to squint and sort of try and make out the pixelation. There's tons of stuff that you can do here. And you should be looking at image formats that save space. You can maybe do lazy loading. There's plenty of optimizations that you can do, but you should be sending people images which work well on their screens. And now a total negative one, the opposite side of the market. Parallelism doesn't really exist in the industry that we work in very often. JS is single core, like single threaded by its design, but it does support workers. It's just that workers have never been popular and almost no one ever uses them. Web workers actually were introduced in the time of Internet Explorer 10, I think was in like 2011 or something like that. But as time has gone on, the average single core power of devices has gone down because there are more devices in the lower end than there are devices that are getting faster. I have a graph after this which kind of half explains this, although I have resources if anyone is interested. But there's tons of work that we do on our apps, especially as they become more and more involved. You saw in the one before, it was about React. Most of us, I think, use something like that. If we're doing data fetching and then decoding a bunch of JSON and then doing transformations to then update a screen, all of that work is work that shouldn't be getting done by the UI thread, because if someone's on a weaker core, their UI is going to suffer while they're doing those updates. And it doesn't need to, because we could do something with a worker to get that done. And people on lower end devices very often have multiple cores because that's what they've been built with, and then we don't use those cores. And if you were to explain to someone who's got a €250 phone, because that's all that they could afford and it was the best that they could get, which is a perfectly valid thing, we can't just say to those people, oh, that sucks, sorry. They have 7 cores and we don't use them because we don't write code in the right way. It's not a good look. So I think looking at things like web workers, especially now that they're becoming a little bit more popular, we could maybe get ahead of the curve on this and try to do kind of the best that we can to offload that work, get nice patterns set up. This won't necessarily make apps faster, but it will make them lighter on the device, and the UI will be a lot more interactive for people if we can get it done. And you can do this piece by piece. You can wrap little things now and again. This is that graph. So you can see the iPhone is the only one that's kind of consistently grown. That yellow line has grown a lot slower than the iOS side. There's another graph that's paired with this I don't have here that shows the distribution of devices in each category. And actually the average is going down over time. The average has kind of stayed at around the 2014 level for 5-6 years. So this is more and more of a point. I'm going to race through these last 2 points. Slow networks are something that happen to everyone regardless of the device. And something we can do about these now in quite a cool way is the client hint API, which at least works on Chrome. I think it works on Firefox as well. Safari, I don't think so. But you can opt into this just by adding one header on your server side, and then the requests to your app will come from the browser, and they'll tell you how fast the network is in 4G, 3G, or 2G. And then you can do stuff based on that. So one of the things that we do in Subito now is cut off the 2x image if someone's on a 3G network, which is around 6% of our traffic. 3G in Italy is quite far behind 4G. The 4G here is really fast. So those networks are pretty slow. And those 2x images are pretty big. Oh, sorry, that's not related to me. I'm also going to finish in just a second. I have 2 more slides and I'm going as fast as I can. So you opt in to get the speed of your network, and then you can do something with it. We cut out the 2x from the images as well, because even though that screen is 2x, if you're on 3G, we say, nah, it's not worth it because this is going to suck so badly for you. Just going to stop it. And the sort of little brother of ECT is the save data flag, which is a Chrome-only custom header. I think it's also called light mode, maybe. I think they changed the name inside, but you can opt in to save data. And this one is like the most user respecting or not respecting thing that's in this whole talk. If someone sends you a header saying, please save data for me, you absolutely should save data for that person because they're begging you not to use it. So in that case, we strip everything out that we can. Right now, it's the images. We use a lot of server-side rendering, so we don't send necessarily a lot of content that gets rendered client-side. But this is something I really, really would recommend is looking into that save data stuff if you start adding in sort of cool stuff to have fallbacks for people that don't want it because it's more important for them to save data because potentially that's really expensive for them. So those are definitely APIs that I would look into even while you're just doing that development work because it takes just a couple of minutes to add it on. It's not too much at all. Very last one, modern browsers. Now we're in 2021. If you still have to support Internet Explorer 11, I'm really sorry. It's worth checking what your browser support list is for your company, and maybe you can get it shifted because Internet Explorer 11 is basically done. Microsoft is done with it. Google Search is done with it. Unless you have a really significant need for it, it was something I really would push to get rid of because of the changes that we can make to the stuff that we ship. Babel for us covers, has from basically my entire career, Babel has thought about this for me. And something that we noticed a couple of weeks ago in Subito is our compile target is still ES5, which is the Internet Explorer 11 one, but we don't support Internet Explorer 11 anymore. And the overwhelming majority of our traffic is on the newest Chrome or the newest Safari or the newest Chrome on mobile. And then the rest of it is on like one or two versions behind of Chrome or one version behind of Safari. But we have like the vast majority of people are on like evergreen stuff at the most recent version. And we look at the code and it is just full of vars. There's polyfills absolutely everywhere. And we needed that, but now we don't need it. And we're sending all of this stuff down to people. 66% of them are on mobile devices. And even though it's really comfortable for us, there's probably a migration that we need to do. And I think that just being aware of what you're shipping down to those people is important. You might need to make this trade-off if you do have a really big set of users that are still on Internet Explorer 11, for example. You could look at doing something like classic scripts versus module scripts to do sort of differentiated loading, which can work. Otherwise, you could make a direct switch. But there's big differences you can get. And I'm going to show one thing, this next slide. You don't need to read the code, you just need the visual sort of aspect of it. This is the same client compared for ES5 and compared for ES 2018. And you can see on disk, those are the weights on disk. I don't know what their exact like byte what weights are because it doesn't matter. They're roughly half. The one on the right has async, has classes. It's got an await in it that actually ran in a browser for like the first time ever that it really worked. And the one on the left has a polyfill implementation of generators, a polyfill implementation of an awaiter, a polyfill implementation of classes that uses the prototype chain. It has a whole stack of checks for compatibility. And every single other client that we have repeats that same code because it needs to be bundled out every single time. So that's like 4 kilobytes of junk that we're sending to people that don't need it for every single time that we send it down. And I hope the Webpack can kind of pull some of that out, but I don't know if it's similar enough. Maybe it can use gzip. But people don't want this. They don't need it. And if we want to make something that's better for people, we should be keeping an eye on what we send down. And just because it's been papered over by a tool doesn't mean that we don't need to do anything about it. So this is something that we're going to try to make a move on now that we can, to make sure that we're not sending down far too much weight for people because it isn't worth it. Fundamentally, it isn't worth it. And there's performance for free. No one wants to be getting all this stuff when they don't need it. So summary, I don't need to read this because it's what I just said. When you work with product, You focus on getting that value delivered and try and think about what value is. It's not about finishing stories, it's about giving things to people. And in tech, track the user base, understand the real user base and not someone else's, not an average one, and try to pull in those technologies which are going to do things for users and focus on things that are going to bring value for them and give them what they need rather than just something that we think is cool. I think there's a trade-off that you can use. You can evaluate how good is this for the end user. If you pull that in, then some of those decisions might be easier to make. Done. And I'm only 6 minutes over.